We all know the trope, the needy, gullible woman who's desperate in love and falls for the bad boy type. Come on, admit it. It's hard to feel sorry for someone who puts himself in that kind of position. But what if we got the story wrong? What if we could roll back time to the beginning of that relationship and actually met the person who met the other individual that duped them? Who would he or she been? Are they the same individual that we see at this end of the relationship, that husk of a person, that broken shell? I'll admit it, I was skeptical, although I was very diplomatic and hid my skepticism by politeness. But if I was honest with you, I would have told you I thought those individuals were weak and needy until it happened to me. Can you imagine a veteran at counseling, someone who is a trained mental health clinician, falling for a con artist? Well, I did. I'm Dr. Kerry Kerr McAvoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience. I had training in working with victims. I had supervised runaway teenagers, and I even managed a suicide crisis hotline. So this population wasn't new to me, and I made the error presuming that my schooling gave me a unique insight into these men and women's vulnerabilities until I discovered that I'd gotten it terribly wrong. So what's the truth about toxic matchups? This is the first of a year-long series on pathological love relationships. It's an inside look, not just from a psychological standpoint, but from a profoundly personal one, at how exploitive people emotionally manipulate those that they meet. Why are these relationships so compelling? And why do some personality types get trapped and find it really difficult, nearly impossible, to leave? I hope you'll come back every Wednesday for the latest episode, and be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you're the first to know when the next episode in this series drops. We're going to be taking a behind-the-scenes look at pathological love relationships and learn the truth about what really happens between the abuser and the victim. I'm going to use my extensive training as a psychologist to dissect complex interpersonal dynamics while giving you insight about the survivors' reactions and motivations, as well as the abusers. Maybe you're like me and you found yourself critical of those who've fallen for these types of situations. Let's find out together if that's been a fair assumption. Or maybe you're someone who's gotten trapped in one of these relationships and you're really struggling to make sense of what's happened and trying to find a way out. This series is going to give you the necessary tools and know-how to understand the underlying threat that you've been facing and to help you find the strength to do something about it. Or maybe you're somebody who just got out of one of these relationships and your head is still spinning. This series is going to help you make sense of what happened so that you can find some closure. Think of abusers like skilled magicians, that with a sleight of hand, they misdirect us and we end up focusing on the one injured instead of the one who's doing the exploiting. Abusers use sophisticated techniques to hide misdeeds. They get us to train our attentions on the victim's weaknesses as if that's the problem, instead of the fact that this victim was misled, deceived, and betrayed by a toxic partner. And then most perpetrators walk away scot-free. This series is going to expose what really goes on in these harmful and often dangerous relationships. If you met me in 2014, you would have thought my life looked great. I had a thriving counseling practice. Patients were often waiting up to a month to see me. And my husband's career was going places. He had a successful job as a civil engineer. 2 of our 3 sons had already left home, and our third one was in his final year of high school. All of that abruptly ended the day after Christmas. The doctor broke the news that my then 52-year-old husband was dying of duodenal cancer. I'll never forget how Brad, my late husband, looked at me when the doctor walked out of the room. We were both in shock, and for a moment there was silence. And then he said to me with tears in his eyes, "I'm not going to make it." 5.5 months later, I stood beside his gravestone, a widow. The lot of the land that we bought to build our new retirement home stood staked out with perimeter lines, and the house plans sat rolled up in the corner of my bedroom. And a few weeks later, I dropped off my youngest son at college. All the dreams I had of enjoying the empty nest years with my husband had been blown apart, and I was left broken and devastated. I didn't know what to do with myself. My counseling practice was gone because I closed it so I could devote my whole attention to my ailing husband's care. Now I had way too much time on my hands and I was floundering to try to find something to do. So I made dating my next job. And a year later, I met my second husband. He was attractive, somebody who checked all the boxes. He had the same faith, his kids were the same age, he had a professional career, and in a whirlwind romance, I fell madly in love and we were married a year later. There were small signs that something was amiss, but I explained it away, like take his odd texting habits. I figured it was because he had a large extended family. And then there was his fatigue and mercurial mood shifts, and I thought, well, he's working really long hours and he's exhausted. Sometimes he was critical about the way I did things, but I just chalked it up as something that all couples had to work through. It was the last night of our delayed honeymoon, just a few weeks before we were to move to Mexico. I woke up to a message from a stranger. I remember trying to blink the sleep from my eyes so I could read this bright screen. When I was finally able to blink the sleep from my eyes and read the overly bright text message, I will never forget what I saw. She wrote, "Well, I guess the joke's not just on me, it's on you too, because I've been dating your husband for the last 3 months." My world shattered. And suddenly it hit me that I had married a stranger. But we were married and we were in a move and too much was already staked on this. And so I attempted to save the relationship. And for the next 2 years, I struggled to save a marriage amidst all the tangle of lies and betrayals. How could I have missed the signs that I had been conned? I was a trained professional, highly experienced therapist. And those of you who've read my book, Love You More, some of you think that I did this because I was so attached to his good looks or the sex was all that great. Then others have claimed in their review that I was just a silly, gullible woman who failed to protect my boundaries better. I want you to know that none of that was true. Here's what I didn't understand. My ex had quietly been maneuvering me into a highly dependent position. He'd cut me off from my support system, and remember, we're living in a foreign country. And then he was using sophisticated brainwashing techniques that cult leaders use to program followers. I had been trauma bonded. Nearly every night, he kept me up late, watching TV beside me, and then we ran all day from appointment to appointment without stopping to eat until late at night. I didn't know that these were abuse tactics that were leaving me confused and overwhelmed. He made sure my life was unpredictable and chaotic, so I felt chronically out of control. And then there was the cheating, which he explained away as a sex addiction, something he claimed he'd battled his whole life and no one had ever taken him seriously. So I threw myself into trying to save him by trying to find the best treatment. Over and over, he would tell me he'd never worked harder, despite the fact of me finding missing Viagra, money gone, and unexplained absences. One betrayal happened after another. I started to be plagued with thoughts of leaving, but I was so afraid of making a mistake. What if he really was working that hard and I left just when it was going to start to turn around? What if I'd gotten it wrong and misread one of the cues or clues? So then I started searching. I combed through his phone at night. I hacked into his computer. I even got into his travel accounts to see if there's any evidence of inappropriate history. And I watched his browser history for evidence of him trying to hook up and meet with somebody. I had no idea that I wasn't living with a man who was trying to change, that he was just getting better at deception. The relationship was careening out of control and I was becoming increasingly desperate and unsure what to do next. I had never heard of the term narcissistic abuse or trauma bond or cognitive dissonance. I had no idea that what I was experiencing was extreme levels of stress, and that my brain was being damaged, and that the confusion I was feeling was real. I didn't know that he was using gaslighting, and that what I was experiencing was called financial and ambient abuse. He had systematically broken down my trust so that now I even questioned my own wisdom. And then there were signs that my health was getting ill. I was in constant stomach pain, my blood sugar levels were climbing, my pulse was racing, and white lines crossed all my fingernails, and my urine was dark and foaming. Then I collapsed on a flight out of the country and lost consciousness. I'll remember sitting next to the onboard vacationing doctor who had taken care of me file the incident report with the airline, and in that report he'd stated that I'd either suffered a heart attack or a mild stroke. There was signs that I was in trouble, that my relationship was in trouble, and that now it was putting my very life on the line, and something had to change, but I didn't know what. I didn't know where, I didn't know how to start. I felt trapped. It was then that I caught a call that something was terribly wrong with my oldest son. He had leukemia. So there it was, the out that I needed. I had needed to leave the country I was living in and fly back to the United States, and I knew I would have to make my family, my son, the new priority, and that probably meant the end of my marriage. And it was during that period of time when my son was getting care in the hospital, getting chemotherapy, that I discovered another text message between my now ex and a girlfriend talking about my inheritance that I had and money that I had, and we were over. It wasn't until I had finished writing the story Love You More 2 years later that the rest of the pieces started to fall into place. It was then that I had crossed Narc Talk on TikTok and began to see words like trauma bond and narcissistic abuse. I realize now that I probably had married a narcissistic sociopath, and that what I survived, although seemed like some wild, bizarre scenes out of a movie, was real, and that wasn't just me that was going through this, but other people who were also going through the same thing. For the first time, things began to make sense, and it was like I had been wearing up to then some colored glasses and saw everything through this rosy grid. And through this discovery of this community about narcissistic abuse and about all the rest of the insight, that the glasses came off and I saw things as they really are. So many of you have contacted me to tell me that you're going through the same type of experience. Please join me this year as we uncover these toxic relationships, inner dynamics. Let's remove your colored glasses so that together we can see what these crazy relationships are. Chaotic, very dangerous, and so conflictual. Be sure to come back next week when I share how to pick out a toxic or narcissistic person in a crowd. Find out how to spot them at your next party or when you walk into the work lunchroom. And would you like to see a toxic relationship dynamic unfold in real time? Then you're going to want to watch my blind reaction to TLC's series Unexpected and meet Kaylin and Jason as they become first-time parents. Have you found this video helpful and would like to see the next in the Toxic Love series? Then be sure to like this episode and to subscribe to my channel. And be sure to check out my lives, my shorts, and come back next week for the next in this series.